My sister took my fiancé, so I took her wedding venue. I never imagined I would say that about my own family, but here I am, telling the story because sometimes life teaches you lessons in the hardest ways. I grew up in a quiet Tennessee suburb, in a small house with a white fence and a rose garden out front. My parents were the kind of people who believed in family dinners every Sunday no matter what, and my sister Emily and I were inseparable, or at least I thought we were. She had always been the one who drew attention, the one whose laugh filled a room and whose confidence made people notice her first. I was quieter, more reserved, the type of person people leaned on but rarely saw in the spotlight. When I met Mark, everything changed. He was patient, thoughtful, and noticed all the small details about me. The way I liked my coffee, the songs that made me smile, how I loved thunderstorms but hated the sound of rain hitting the roof while I tried to sleep. He was steady in a way I had never known before, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly chosen. I introduced him to my family during Thanksgiving. Emily, as usual, showed up late, wearing a bright red dress that made everyone turn their heads. She smiled and shook his hand and said, "So this is the guy who finally stole Jenna's heart." We all laughed, but even then I felt a small shift in the air, just a tiny flicker that I didn't understand at the time. Mark and I fell into a comfortable rhythm. We planned for a house, talked about future kids, and shared our dreams. When he proposed by the lake where we'd first met, the sunlight reflecting off the water, it felt perfect. Emily was the first person I called, and she screamed through the phone with excitement. For a moment, I believed she was genuinely happy for me. Months passed as we dove into wedding planning. Emily offered to help with small things, and at first, it felt nice having her around. But gradually, she started making decisions without asking me, adjusting flower arrangements, calling vendors, suggesting changes to my invitations. Each time I questioned it, she would smile and say, "Relax, Jen, I'm just trying to help." I felt a small unease creeping in, but brushed it aside, trying to trust her like I always had. Then came the dress fitting. I stepped out of the room, wearing a lace gown I had chosen months earlier, expecting Emily to be happy for me. Instead, she tilted her head and said, "It's nice, but maybe not for your body type, you know?" Her words cut deeper than I expected, and for the first time, I realized that maybe the sister I loved the most could also be the one who hurt me the deepest. Around the same time, I began noticing changes in Mark. He seemed distant, distracted, and quick to cancel plans. When I asked him what was wrong, he shrugged it off, saying he was just tired. But then one evening, I saw a message on his phone from Emily. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Don't forget the wine." My stomach turned. I told myself it was innocent. Maybe they were coordinating something for the wedding, but my gut told me otherwise. The truth hit me 2 weeks later. I went to my mom's to drop off invitations and casually mentioned Mark and Emily's business trip. My mom paused, and then gently she said, "Oh, they went together, didn't they?" My heart sank. That night, I drove to Mark's apartment. When he opened the door, I saw her, Emily, standing there, wearing his t-shirt. For a moment, everything inside me froze. I didn't yell or cry. I just stared. Emily tried to explain. "Jenna, I didn't mean..." I held up my hand. "Don't." Mark mumbled, "It just happened." And I finally whispered, "Things like this don't just happen. People choose them." I turned and walked away, feeling like my world quietly collapsed around me. The following weeks were unbearable. Emily and Mark didn't even hide their relationship. They posted pictures together, celebrated milestones, and everyone around me whispered about it as if I didn't exist. The ring that Mark had once slipped onto my finger now adorned Emily's hand. My dreams of a shared future had vanished, and it was hard to even breathe without remembering the betrayal. Then one morning, as I sat on the porch sipping coffee, I realized something crucial. I couldn't let them steal my peace too. Emily had taken my fiancé, but she wouldn't take my dignity. She wouldn't take my control over my own life. I learned that Emily had chosen the same venue we had reserved a year ago, a beautiful countryside estate outside Nashville, the place I had imagined walking down the aisle, saying vows to Mark. That's when I called the venue. "Hi, this is Jenna Carter. I think there might be a mix-up on a booking from last year," I said. The manager checked the records and told me my reservation still had credit, and technically, nothing had been finalized for Emily. I smiled and said, "Then I'd like to use that credit." For the same weekend, the venue was mine again. When Emily found out, she called me, crying. "Why would you do this to me?" she asked. I simply said, "Emily, you took something from me that wasn't yours. I guess we're even now." She screamed and hung up. I didn't argue or yell back. Sometimes silence and calm are louder than words. On the day that should have been her wedding, I arrived early. I walked the gardens, remembered my own dreams, and for the first time, didn't cry. I left flowers at the tables, not for love, but for closure. The air smelled like rain, and the soft piano music the venue played felt like a healing balm on months of pain. I whispered, "Thank you," not to Emily or Mark, but to myself, because I had survived, because I had taken back my life. Months later, I ran into Mark at a cafe. He looked older, tired, full of regret. "I made a mistake, Jenna. You were the one I should have married," he said. I smiled gently. "You were right about one thing. I wasn't the right one for you, but I was the right one for me." And I walked away. A year later, I met someone new, someone patient, kind, and honest. He loved the parts of me I used to hide, the parts Emily and Mark never saw. I didn't rush. We let life unfold slowly, peacefully. I learned that family doesn't always mean loyalty, and love doesn't always last forever. But real peace comes when you reclaim your worth, when you stop letting others define your happiness. Yes, my sister took my fiancé, but I took my peace, and nothing, no betrayal, no heartbreak can take that away from me. I remember the nights after I discovered the truth. I would sit by my bedroom window, staring at the raindrops running down the glass, and I would ask myself the same question over and over. How could Emily do this to me? She was my sister, my best friend, my confidant. And Mark was supposed to be different. He was supposed to love me for who I was, to stand by me through everything. But instead, they betrayed me together. And the silence of my house felt heavier than ever. The clocks ticked so loudly, as if the world was reminding me that life doesn't wait for heartbreak to pass. I started avoiding the house, spending hours walking in the park near our neighborhood, letting the cold wind whip around me, trying to erase their presence from my mind. Yet every memory of our shared past would come back. Emily laughing with me over silly childhood games, Mark holding my hand on our first date, all the plans we had made that now seemed impossible. It was during one of those walks that I realized something important. The betrayal hurt, yes, but the pain didn't have to define me. I couldn't control what Emily or Mark did, but I could control how I responded. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't let them dictate my story anymore. Weeks later, I discovered that Emily had booked a countryside estate for her wedding, the same venue Mark and I had spent months dreaming about. I could have screamed, could have confronted her, could have fallen apart, but instead, I did something quiet, something that gave me back the control I had lost. I called the venue. I explained that my reservation from the previous year had never been finalized, and that I had credit remaining. The manager hesitated, clearly aware of the conflict, but he eventually said, "Technically, you still hold the reservation." I booked it immediately. When Emily found out, she called, her voice full of tears and anger. "Why would you do this to me?" she demanded. I took a deep breath and replied calmly, "Emily, you took something from me that wasn't yours. I'm just reclaiming what was mine." She screamed, cursed, and hung up. I felt no triumph in that moment, only a quiet satisfaction. The power wasn't in hurting her back. It was in knowing that I still had dignity, that I still had agency over my life. On the day of the wedding she never had, I arrived early at the estate. The gardens were peaceful. The air smelled faintly of rain, and soft piano music drifted through the open windows. I walked slowly along the paths we had once imagined as our wedding aisle. I left flowers on the tables, not for celebration, but for closure. And as I stood there, I realized that I had survived something I never thought I could. Months passed. Life returned to a new rhythm. My family still whispered, but I didn't care what they thought. I had learned that their opinions, their judgments, and even their silence were not my responsibility. Then, one afternoon, I ran into Mark at a small cafe downtown. He looked older, worn out, like life had weighed heavily on him. "Jenna," he said quietly, almost hesitant, "I made a mistake. You were the one I should have married." I smiled softly, a genuine smile that came from months of healing. "You were right about one thing, Mark," I said. "I wasn't the right one for you, but I was the right one for me." And with that, I left. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. A year later, I met someone new, someone kind, quiet, steady. He never made me feel like I had to shrink to fit into his life. He loved the parts of me that were true, unfiltered, and vulnerable. We didn't rush. We simply let life unfold naturally, learning to trust and grow together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt safe in the knowledge that love could be gentle, honest, and enduring. Looking back, I realized that betrayal and heartbreak don't destroy us. They reveal us. They show us what we are capable of surviving, what we are capable of reclaiming. I learned that forgiveness is not about excusing someone else's behavior. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger, of resentment, of disappointment. I learned to stand taller, walk slower, and breathe easier. I learned that the people who betray you are not the ones who define your worth. That worth is yours to nurture, protect, and celebrate. Emily took my fiancé. She tried to take my dreams. She tried to take my happiness, but she never could take my peace. That I kept for myself. And when I finally let myself smile again, it wasn't because of revenge. It wasn't because of Mark. It was because I had chosen me. I still remember the way the house felt after Emily and Mark left for their trip. The silence was crushing. Every corner seemed to echo with memories. Our shared bedroom where we used to whisper secrets late at night. The kitchen where we laughed over spilled milk. The living room couch where Mark and I had planned our first life together. Now, all of it felt empty, as if the walls themselves had been complicit in my heartbreak. I spent nights pacing, staring out the window at the streetlights reflecting on wet pavement, wondering how the two people I trusted most could betray me so completely. I kept asking myself the same questions. Was I not enough? Did I not see the signs? But deep down, I knew that no matter how much I had given, their choices were never about me. They were about themselves, about selfishness and desire. One evening, my mom came into my room. She didn't say much. She just sat beside me on the bed and held my hand. "I know it hurts, honey," she whispered, "but sometimes the people we love the most are also the ones who hurt us the deepest. It's not your fault." Her words were soft, almost like a balm. And for the first time, I felt a small spark of clarity. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. I could choose to sit in bitterness, or I could take back my power. The next morning, I started planning quietly. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, only that I needed to do something. I remembered the venue we had reserved for our wedding, the countryside estate with the sprawling gardens and antique white doors. I had imagined walking down the aisle there in that exact garden, saying vows to Mark while the sun set behind us. Now, Emily was trying to claim it as her own. I called the venue. The manager answered immediately, and I explained my situation. There was a long pause. "Technically," he said, "you still have the reservation on file. The deposit was never fully processed." My heart raced. I took a deep breath. "Then I'd like to use it for the same weekend." A week later, Emily called. She was frantic. "Why are you doing this?" she yelled. I stayed calm. "Because you took something that wasn't yours," I replied softly. "I'm just reclaiming it." She screamed, cursed, and hung up. For a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt, but then I reminded myself this wasn't about revenge. This was about restoring my life. When the day of the venue arrived, I drove slowly down the winding path leading to the estate. The sun was low, casting a warm golden glow across the gardens. I walked through the spaces I had once dreamed about, the arches covered in roses, the stone benches lining the pathways, the little fountain where I had imagined Mark and I taking photos. I laid flowers on the tables, walked the garden paths, and breathed in the crisp air. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't need to. I just stood there, feeling my heart begin to settle again. Months later, I ran into Mark at a cafe. He looked tired, older than he had a year ago. "Jenna," he said, almost hesitantly, "I made a mistake. You were the one I should have married." I smiled gently. "You were right about one thing," I said. "I wasn't the right one for you, but I was the right one for me." I left him there, sipping his coffee, as I walked into a life that was entirely my own. It took time to heal. It took late nights of journaling, long walks, and conversations with friends who reminded me that I deserved better. I learned that family doesn't always mean loyalty, that love doesn't always last, but that peace is something you can take back for yourself if you are brave enough. A year later, I met someone new, someone kind, quiet, steady. He didn't demand that I shrink to fit into his life. He loved me fully, with all my scars, all my memories, all my truths. We didn't rush. We simply let life unfold naturally, learning together, trusting together. And in the quiet moments, when the world is still and the soft hum of life surrounds me, I reflect on everything I went through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, the tears, and I realize that every painful step led me to a stronger, wiser, more resilient version of myself. Emily took my fiancé. She tried to take my dreams. She tried to take my happiness, but she never, ever took my peace. That I kept. I remember my childhood with Emily vividly. We were inseparable for as long as I could remember. Summers were spent running barefoot through the backyard, playing hide and seek until our mom called us in for dinner. Emily was always louder, bolder, the one who dared to climb trees higher than anyone else. I would follow her, my heart pounding, but always careful to land safely. She would laugh and extend a hand down to pull me up. Those hands, so strong, so familiar, had once been my safe place. We shared everything, secrets, clothes, even the smallest heartbreaks. When we argued, it was usually over something trivial, like who got to sit in the front seat on family drives or who got the last cookie. But after a fight, we'd always make up by whispering our promises to never let anyone come between us. Little did I know that one day it would be those promises that would haunt me. Meeting Mark had felt like fate. He noticed everything about me, and I fell in love quickly. When I first brought him to meet Emily, I expected her to embrace him as I had imagined. She smiled, yes, but there was a flicker in her eyes I hadn't seen before, a quick glance that lingered a second too long. I told myself I was imagining things. I wanted to trust her. The early days of wedding planning were a blur of excitement. I would spend hours looking at florists, tasting cakes, and discussing themes with Mark. Emily, eager to help, would often accompany me, and at first it felt supportive, but gradually I noticed the little things. Changing flower arrangements without asking, gently suggesting changes to my wedding invitations, calling vendors to confirm appointments. Every time I confronted her, she would smile sweetly and say, "Relax, Jen, I'm just trying to help." I tried to trust her intentions, but a subtle unease was reading. The first major crack came during my dressing. I stepped out of the dressing room expecting Emily to be excited. Instead, she tilted her head and said, "It's nice, but maybe not for your body." Her words, casual as they seemed, cut through me like a knife. I wanted to cry, to yell, to make her see the damage she was causing, but I only nodded silently. Then came the distance in Mark's behavior. He started canceling plans, arriving late dinner, sending texts that seemed distracted or cold. When I questioned him, he would shrug and mutter about being tired. But one evening, I saw a message on his phone from Emily. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Don't forget the wine." My stomach hurt. I wanted to believe it was innocent, but my instincts screamed otherwise. The truth hit me when I visited my mom to drop off wedding invitation. She hesitated before gently mentioning that Emily and Mark gone on business together. My chest tightened. That night, I drove Mark's car. When he opened the door, I froze. There she was, Emily, standing behind him, wearing his gear. For a long moment, I only stared. Emily tried to speak, but I held up my hand. "Don't," Mark said quietly. I shook my head slowly. "Things like this don't use." I turned and left, walking into the night, feeling as though my entire life collapsed quietly around me. The weeks that followed were unbearable. Emily and Mark were open about their relation, posting pictures and celebrating milestones. Family whispered, friends offered hollow consolations, but no one asked me how I felt. The ring that had once symbolized my future now adorned Emily's finger. Every shared memory, every dream, every plan gone. But one night, sitting on my bedroom floor, staring at the rain on my window, I realized something important. I couldn't let them steal my peace too. I couldn't continue to let the trail find me. Then that I decided I was not for revenge, but to reclaim my life. I remembered the countryside estate we had reserved, the same place Emily planned to have her wedding. I called the venue, explained my situation, and was told my reservation still held credit. My heart raced as I booked the estate for the same weekend. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, calm, as if I had finally taken the first step back to myself. When Emily found out, she called me in tears and anger. "Why would you do this to me?" she demanded. I stayed calm. "Because you took something that wasn't yours. I'm just reclaiming what was mine." She screamed, cursed, and hung up. And for the first time in months, I didn't cry. I didn't need to. On the day of the estate, I walked slowly through the gardens, letting the memories of what could have been wash over me. I left flowers on the tables, not for celebration, but for closure. The soft piano music played through the open windows, and the rain had just stopped. I whispered to myself, "Thank you, not to Emily, not to Mark, but to me, for surviving, for reclaiming my life, for choosing peace." Months later, I ran into Mark at a cafe. He looked older, tired, weighed down by regret. "Jenna, I made a mistake. You were the one I should have married," he said softly. I smiled, a genuine smile born from months months of healing. You were right about one thing. I wasn't the right one for you, but I was the right one for me. I walked away, not looking back, stepping fully into a life of my own choosing. Over time, I met someone new, someone kind, patient, and steady. He loved all the parts of me that Emily and Mark never could, all the parts I had hidden or questioned myself about. We didn't rush. We let life unfold slowly, learning to trust and grow together. And for the first time, I felt safe through all of it. I learned that family doesn't always mean loyalty, and love doesn't always last. Peace, real peace, is something you take back for yourself. Emily took my fiancé. She tried to take my dreams. She tried to take my happiness, but she never, ever took my peace. That was my peace. I remember when Emily and I were younger, long before betrayal ever touched our lives. Our childhood was filled with laughter, arguments over who got the front seat of the car, and late-night whispers of secrets nobody else could hear. Emily was daring. She would climb the tallest tree in the backyard, her curls bouncing in the wind, and I would watch her from below, afraid of heights, yet wanting to follow. She always reached down her hand to pull me up. I took it without hesitation, trusting her entirely. That trust, that bond, had seemed unbreakable. School days were no different. Emily had a way of drawing attention. Teachers loved her quick wit. Classmates admired her confidence. I, on the other hand, preferred to stay in the background, observing, quietly cheering her on. Yet we balanced each other. She made me brave when I felt timid. I made her pause and think when she rushed into things. Together, we were a unit. When I met Mark in college, I felt an instant connection I had never felt before. He noticed things about me others never did. The tiny freckles on my nose, the way I tucked my hair behind my ear when nervous, how I always reached for the last slice of pizza, despite claiming I wasn't hungry. He was steady, kind, and patient. When he proposed, I called Emily first. I expected pure joy, the excitement that matched mine. Instead, I felt a subtle shift. She screamed through the phone, yes, but there was a flicker in her tone that I couldn't place, a shadow behind her cheer. At first, Emily's involvement in the wedding planning seemed harmless. She accompanied me to tastings, offered suggestions, and helped coordinate small details. But gradually, it turned subtle and controlling. She would call vendors directly, make adjustments without consulting me, and gently undermine my choices, all while smiling and saying, I just want everything to be perfect for you. I wanted to trust her, so I ignored the growing unease in my chest. Then came the dress fitting. I had picked a gown months ago, a delicate lace number with a flowing train. Stepping out of the dressing room, I expected Emily to be delighted. Instead, she said softly, almost casually, it's nice, but maybe not the best for your body type. I felt the words sink like stones in my stomach. She smiled, thinking she was helping. I nodded, forcing a polite smile, but inside, a storm was beginning. The cracks widened when Mark started to distance himself. He was distracted. Canceled plans seemed tense. When I asked, he shrugged, claiming work stress. But one evening, I glimpsed a text from Emily. Can't wait to see you tonight. Don't forget the wine. My stomach twisted. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was innocent, but deep down I knew. The truth came crashing down weeks later. Visiting my mom to drop off invitations, she hesitated before telling me softly that Emily and Mark had taken a trip together. My hands shook. That night, I drove to Mark's apartment. The door opened, and there she was, Emily, standing behind him, wearing his t-shirt, smiling too easily. Time slowed. My heart raced. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I don't know what to say, Emily began. Don't, I interrupted, my voice low. Just don't. Mark tried to explain. It just happened. I shook my head slowly. Things like this don't just happen. People choose them. And with that, I walked away. Weeks passed in silence, in whispers from family, in social media posts that streamed their happiness while I mourned mine. The ring I had worn proudly now adorned Emily's finger. Every shared dream, every imagined future seemed stolen. I spent nights walking, sitting on the park benches as rain fell softly around me, letting the cold air cleanse my thoughts. Then slowly, clarity emerged. I realized I could not let them take my life, my peace, or my dignity. I could not control their actions, but I could control my response. Remembering the countryside estate we had reserved, I called the venue. They confirmed that my reservation still had credit. My heart pounded as I booked it. The act wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming control, about saying silently but firmly, I choose myself. When Emily found out, she called in tears and rage. Why would you do this? She shouted. I replied calmly, because you took something that wasn't yours. I'm just reclaiming it. She screamed, cursed, and hung up. I felt no triumph. I felt steady. I felt free. The day of the venue, I walked slowly through the gardens. The air smelled faintly of rain. Soft piano music floated through open windows. I walked the aisle we had dreamed of, leaving flowers on tables not for celebration but for closure. I whispered, thank you, not to her, not to him, but to myself. Months later, I ran into Mark at a cafe. He looked older, worn down by regret. I made a mistake, he said softly. You were the one I should have married. You were right about one thing, I said. I wasn't the right one for you, but I was the right one for me. And I walked away, feeling lighter than I had in months. Over time, I met someone new, kind, patient, steady. He loved all the parts of me that had been hidden, all the scars, all the truths I had tried to hide. We didn't rush. We simply let life unfold naturally. And for the first time, I felt safe. I learned that family doesn't always mean loyalty. Love doesn't always last, but peace is something you reclaim. Emily tried to take my fiancé, my dreams, my happiness, but she never took my peace. That remained mine. I remember one summer when Emily and I were about 12. Our neighborhood had a small creek, and we would spend hours there building tiny dams with sticks and stones. Emily always took a lead, shouting instructions like a general, and I would follow, careful not to break her creations. One day, a sudden current knocked over all our work. I expected her to be angry, angry, but she laughed, her curls wet and sticking to her forehead. She turned to me and said, "It's okay, Jen. We'll build it bigger next time." That moment stayed with me. Her resilience, her way of finding joy even in small disaster. It's strange to think about those memories now, knowing that same sister would one day hurt me so deeply. But those days also reminded me of my own strength. I had learned early how to adapt, how to survive disappointment, even if it came from someone I trusted completely. As I grew older, Emily and I remained close, but subtle competitions began to form. She was always the first to get praise at school, the first to receive awards, the first to be noticed. I quietly celebrated her victories while hiding the small pangs of jealousy. I told myself it was admiration, not envy, but in retrospect, it was a mix of both. When I met Mark in college, I felt like I had found a kind of stability I had never known. He noticed me, truly saw me, in a way Emily sometimes did, but differently. Where Emily's attention was about control and influence, Mark's was about care and understanding, and I let myself fall completely. Introducing him to Emily had felt natural at first. I expected her to be thrilled for me. She smiled, yes, but that glint in her eyes, that momentary pause, hinted at something deeper, something unspoken. I didn't notice it at the time. I chose to ignore it. Wedding planning began with excitement. I spent hours poring over fabrics, tasting cakes, and visiting venues. Emily would accompany me, offering suggestions. At first, it was helpful. She would point out color combinations I hadn't thought of, or recommend florists. But gradually, her help became intrusive. She would call vendors, adjust seating arrangements, suggest alterations to my invitations. Each time I questioned her, she would smile and say, "I just want it to be perfect for you, Jen." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her. But a seed of doubt had begun to grow. The first major blow came during my dress fitting. I had chosen a lace gown, flowing and delicate, months before. I stepped out of the dressing room, expecting Emily to smile, to cheer. Instead, she said softly, "It's nice, but maybe not the best for your body type." Those words, casual and seemingly harmless, felt like a cold breeze on my heart. I nodded, forcing a polite smile, but inside, a storm was beginning to rage. Meanwhile, Mark began acting differently. He canceled plans, seemed distracted, and appeared tense during our conversations. When I questioned him, he muttered about work stress or fatigue. But one evening, a message on his phone caught my eye. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Don't forget the wine." It was from Emily. My stomach dropped. I wanted to believe it was innocent, a misunderstanding, but the knot in my chest told me otherwise. The truth revealed itself weeks later. Visiting my mom to drop off invitations, she hesitated and softly said, "You know, Emily and Mark went on a trip together." My hands trembled. That night, I drove to Mark's apartment. When the door opened, Emily was standing behind him, wearing his t-shirt, smiling too easily. Time froze. My heart pounded. "I don't know what to say," Emily began. "Don't," I whispered, holding up my hand. Mark muttered, "It just happened. Things like this don't just happen," I said, my voice steady, though shaking inside. "People choose them." And I walked away, feeling the world collapse quietly around me. The following weeks were unbearable. Emily and Mark posted photos together, celebrated milestones openly, and my family whispered in corners while avoiding my gaze. Every place I looked reminded me of what I had lost. I spent hours walking the neighborhood streets, letting the night air and rain wash over me. Slowly, I realized that while I couldn't control their choices, I could control mine. I could reclaim my life. Remembering the countryside estate we had reserved, I called the venue. The manager confirmed my reservation still held credit. My heart raced as I booked it for the same weekend. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine, taking back my narrative. Emily called, frantic. "Why are you doing this?" she shouted. I replied calmly, "Because you took something that wasn't yours. I'm just reclaiming it." She screamed, cursed, and hung up. I felt no triumph, only calm. On the day of the estate, I walked slowly through the gardens. The air smelled of rain. The soft piano music drifted through open windows. I walked the aisle we had imagined, leaving flowers on tables, not for celebration, but for closure. I whispered to myself, "Thank you. Not to Emily, not to Mark, but to me, for surviving, for reclaiming my life, for choosing peace." Months later, I ran into Mark at a cafe. He looked older, worn by regret. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. "You were the one I should have married." "You were right about one thing," I replied. "I wasn't the right one for you, but I was the right one for me." And I walked away, lighter than I had felt in months. Over time, I met someone new, patient, kind, steady. He loved the parts of me that had been hidden, scarred, or doubted. We didn't rush. We let life unfold naturally, building trust slowly. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I learned that family doesn't always mean loyalty. Love doesn't always last, but peace is something you reclaim. Emily tried to take my fiancé, my dreams, my happiness, but she never took my peace. That was mine to keep. I remember another childhood memory that still haunts me in a bittersweet way. Emily and I were about 10, and it was my birthday. I had asked for a small party in our backyard, balloons, cupcakes, and just a few friends. Emily, being Emily, insisted on inviting the entire neighborhood. At first, I was frustrated. I wanted a quiet celebration, but she took charge, decorating with wild energy and excitement, pulling me into the chaos with laughter and teasing. As I looked around at all the children running and laughing, I felt a rush of happiness. But later that evening, I overheard Emily whispering to Mom, "I think Jen is too quiet. She should try to be more like me." I didn't tell anyone I heard it, but it lodged itself in my mind. I began to notice the subtle ways Emily always positioned herself in the spotlight, how she sometimes manipulated situations to appear more capable, more loved, more noticed. At the time, it felt harmless. sibling rivalry, I thought, but these patterns would later surface in ways I never imagined. Fast forward to wedding planning, a period that should have been full of joy. I had spent weeks dreaming about the venue, the colors, the flowers, imagining Mark's face when he saw everything come together. Emily's interference began subtly. She suggested vendors I hadn't asked for, pushed for a different florist, subtly questioned my choices in front of Mark. I remember one evening at the dining table, Emily leaned over and said, "Maybe the navy blue tablecloths are too dark. You don't want everything to feel gloomy, do you?" I smiled politely, but my heart sank. It was the first time I noticed how calculated her help could be. Then came the cake tasting. Mark and I had picked a small, delicate cake with vanilla and strawberry layers. Soft, elegant, exactly what we had imagined. Emily pushed for a chocolate and espresso cake, claiming it was trendy and everyone would love it. When I resisted, she laughed softly. "You'll thank me later." I felt a flicker of irritation, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was overreacting. The tension grew over time, subtly, almost invisibly. Mark began to seem distant. He arrived late to meetings, answered texts coldly, and canceled dates. I questioned him repeatedly, and he offered vague explanations. But one night, I glimpsed a text from Emily. "I can't wait to see you tonight. Don't forget the wine." My stomach twisted. I wanted to believe it was innocent, but something inside told me it wasn't. The revelation came gradually, but hit like a storm. Small clues, offhand comments, missed calls, and hidden glances all added up. The first time I confronted Mark directly, he avoided my gaze, muttered excuses, and then the undeniable truth. One evening, I visited my mom and heard her mention the trip Emily and Mark had taken together. My heart froze. I went to Mark's apartment that night. The door opened, and there she was, Emily, standing behind him, wearing his t-shirt, smiling too easily. I froze. Time slowed. My mind spun. "I don't know what to say," Emily began. "Don't," I said firmly, raising my hand. Mark muttered, "It just happened. Things like this don't just happen," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "People choose them." And I walked away, each step heavier than the last. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. Emily and Mark posted pictures, celebrated milestones, and my family whispered in corners while avoiding my eyes. Every glance, every shared memory reminded me of what had been stolen. The ring I had once worn with pride now shone on Emily's finger. I spent hours walking the streets near my apartment, letting the night air and light drizzle wash over me. Slowly, clarity emerged. While I couldn't control their actions, I could control mine. I could reclaim my life. The countryside estate we had once reserved, our dream venue, became the focal point of my plan to take back control. I called the manager, and after a tense conversation, they confirmed my reservation still held credit. My hands trembled slightly as I booked it for the same weekend Emily had chosen. This wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming my narrative, restoring balance to my life. When Emily discovered what I had done, she called in a mix of panic and anger. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. "Because you took something that wasn't yours," I replied calmly. "I'm just reclaiming it." She screamed, cursed, and hung up. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm, steady, and in control. The day of the estate, I walked through the gardens slowly. The scent of wet earth after rain mingled with roses in full bloom. Soft piano music drifted through open windows. I walked along the aisle we had imagined, leaving flowers on tables, not to celebrate, but to find closure. I whispered thank you, not to Emily, not to Mark, but to myself for surviving, for reclaiming my life, for choosing peace. Months later, I ran into Mark at a cafe. He looked older, weary with regret. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. "You were the one I should have married. You were right about one thing," I said. "I wasn't the right one for you, but I was the right one for me." And I walked away, feeling lighter than I had in months. Over time, I met someone new, patient, kind, and steady. He loved all the parts of me that had been hidden, scarred, or doubted. We didn't rush. We let life unfold naturally, learning to trust and grow together. For the first time, I felt safe again. Through all of it, I realized something essential. Family doesn't always mean loyalty. Love doesn't always last. But peace, real peace, is something you reclaim for yourself. Emily tried to take my fiancé, my dreams, my happiness, but she never took my peace. That remained mine. I remember the summer Emily and I were 13. Our parents had gone out of town, leaving us alone for a week. At first, it felt like freedom. Staying up late, eating cereal for dinner, watching movies we weren't supposed to. We laughed endlessly, played pranks on each other, and shared secrets we had never told anyone else. That week, we created a small world of our own, where nothing could touch us. But even then, the first hints of rivalry appeared. Emily wanted to redecorate my side of the room, insisting that her taste was better for me. I argued, but she simply ignored me, rearranging books and posters while humming a triumphant tune. I remember sitting on my bed, watching her work, feeling both admiration and irritation. It was the first time I realized how powerful she could be in controlling situations and how I sometimes let her. Fast forward to wedding planning, and those patterns became magnified. Emily would insist on being present for every vendor meeting, every dress fitting. I noticed that she subtly tried to sway decisions in her favor, even when I had made clear choices. One day at the florist, she said, "These flowers are too traditional. You need something modern like me." I clenched my jaw and forced a smile. "I like tradition," I said softly. She arched an eyebrow, smiled, and walked away. The cake tasting was another battlefield. I had picked a delicate vanilla strawberry design, soft and elegant. Emily pushed for a rich chocolate espresso cake, claiming it was trendy and everyone would love it. When I resisted, she laughed softly. "You'll thank me later." later," she said. I wanted to snap, to scream, but I stayed calm, pretending the remark didn't cut through me. Mark started becoming distant around this time. Canceled plans, curt texts, late arrivals, all excuses about work or stress. One evening, a text from Emily appeared on Mark's phone. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Don't forget the wine." My stomach twisted. I wanted to believe it was innocent, but I knew it wasn't. The truth hit like a storm. Small clues, offhand comments, missed calls, hidden glances, they all added up. Weeks later, during a visit to my mom, she casually mentioned the trip Emily and Mark had taken together. My heart froze. That night, I drove to Mark's apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The door opened. Emily was there, wearing his t-shirt, smiling too easily. I froze. My chest tightened. Time slowed. "I don't know what to say," she began. "Don't," I said firmly, raising my hand. Mark muttered, "It just happened. Things like this don't just happen," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "People choose them." And I walked away, each step heavier than the last. The weeks that followed were dark. Emily and Mark flaunted their relationship openly. My family whispered but offered little comfort. Every glance at social media reminded me of what had been stolen. My engagement ring now shone on Emily's finger. Every shared dream, every imagined future felt like it had been ripped from me. I spent hours walking at night, letting the rain cleanse my mind, feeling the wet drops wash away anger, sadness, and disbelief. Slowly, clarity came. I couldn't control them, but I could control myself. I could reclaim my life. The countryside estate we had once reserved became my beacon. I called the manager, and after confirming the reservation still held credit, I booked it for the same weekend Emily had chosen. This wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming my narrative, taking back control. Emily discovered what I had done and called, frantic. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you took something that wasn't yours," I replied calmly. "I'm just reclaiming it." She screamed, cursed, and hung up. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm, steady, and free. On the day of the estate, I walked slowly through the gardens. The air smelled of rain and roses. Soft piano music drifted through the open windows. I walked the aisle we had imagined, leaving flowers on tables, not for celebration, but for closure. I whispered, "Thank you." Not to Emily, not to Mark, but to myself, for surviving, for reclaiming my life, for choosing peace. Months later, I ran into Mark at a cafe. He looked older, weary, with regret. "I made a mistake," he said softly. "You were the one I should have married." "You were right about one thing," I replied. "I wasn't the right one for you, but I was the right one for me." And I walked away, feeling lighter than I had in months. Over time, I met someone new, patient, kind, steady. He loved all the parts of me that had been hidden, scarred, or doubted. We didn't rush. We let life unfold naturally, learning to trust and grow together. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I learned that family doesn't always mean loyalty. Love doesn't always last, but peace is something you reclaim for yourself. Emily tried to take my fiancé, my dreams, my happiness, but she never took my peace. That remained mine. I look back now at everything I went through, the heartbreak, the tears, the nights of solitude, the anger, the betrayal. I realized each moment was shaping me into someone stronger, wiser, more resilient. Every pain became a lesson. Every tear became a step toward freedom. And as I sit quietly on my balcony watching the sunset, I smile. Life is still messy, still unpredictable, but I have learned that the one thing no one can ever take from me is my inner peace. That is mine, always mine. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.